Good morning, everyone. I'm the co-chair of the Technical and Innovation Group at the Resource Management Association Scotland. And to give you an idea as to who the Resource Management Association is, I'm also going to cover some of my views on the NHS sector here in Scotland and some of the challenges you'll face with resources and waste, some of which you've heard about from the Scottish Government. So what's the easiest way to describe the Resource Management Association? Well, if you have the 32 local authorities on one side who mainly collect from households in an area, that's one big slice of bread. And then on the other side, you have the big national and international waste management names who collect nationwide. That's another big slice of bread, and I like to think of us as the really tasty, nice ingredient in the middle that makes your sandwich special. So about 2 years ago, we noticed that those groups of individuals and companies, which you could probably best describe as big fish in smaller ponds, didn't really have a voice, and that voice wasn't particularly sophisticated, it wasn't very joined up, and it struggled to make its way in terms of discussing and putting forward the services that it provides in Scotland to a number of organisations from Shetland, Orkney, Western Isles, all the way through the Highlands to the central belt of Scotland and the borders. We're not for profit, we're non-political, we're a membership organisation which can range from individual companies like mine or a one-person band, but to, as I say, some of those larger fish in smaller ponds. And we've been operating since 2019. We have about 75 member companies, but importantly, that covers about 157 senior decision makers in some of these companies. And you've heard today about the challenges that Scotland signed up to. I mean, Scotland signed up to delivering a net zero carbon society by 2045. And you've heard how you guys have really nicely been given that challenge, but 5 years earlier than that. So it's not an insignificant challenge. I'm sure that all of you know that. And in a similar way, the RMAS group decided that we needed a sector plan. And the sector plan was to try to focus people's minds on that direction, the direction of travel we should be going in, and what we might need to do and what we might need to think about on the way. So in a kind of segue to the years of COVID that we've been through, what we noticed, and you may not have thought about it, was first of all, I thought it was really interesting that you were all immediately described as essential workers, but we had to persuade the government that people, the men and women that pick up your bins, were essential workers, but we managed to persuade them by telling them that if we just left all of your rubbish at home, once you're knee deep in it, they would realise we were essential workers. And also when we found out that the NHS waste stream doubled with all of the PPE that arose, we found out that you are highly dependent upon the resource and waste management sector. But what that told us was, as a business, when you looked out and the pub shut, and the hotel shut, and the restaurant shut, and all of the theatres shut, and all of the cultural centres shut, you suddenly saw how interconnected we were. And what we wondered about was what would come back and then go away again, and what would stay and permanently take over. And that then made us think about that sector plan and being able to empathise with those sectors, understand them more, and understand the waste that would arise in them, and what we would need to do to help work with the NHS and others to help tackle the carbon issues, so the manufacturing of products, the consumption of products, and then ultimately the disposal of those products in order to help you achieve your carbon goals. And that's not just about, as was said earlier, the treatment and the disposal of items. That's down to how do we avoid creating the waste in the first instance. It's about how can we reuse items. It's about how can we repurpose items. And it's about how we can transport goods. So another example I'll give you is that our sector's been struggling with how do we deliver net carbon zero transport. So we can probably find a truck or a van or a car with a range on it with electric or hydrogen that would cover the central belt of Scotland. But if you want a big truck to travel from the central belt of Scotland to the Highlands of Scotland, it doesn't have the range on it. It doesn't have the specification, and it doesn't have the reliability of infrastructure to deliver it. So to me, that's not a problem of zero carbon trucks in the waste industry. That's a problem of big trucks in Scotland and how we get them to net carbon zero. So working together is probably the best way to solve that problem. And then we have issues to do with waste treatment. When I was a young lad, I used to say to my granddad, "What's that horrible smell in the village?" And he would say, "Oh, that's them just setting the dump on fire again." And we've come a long, long way from that situation where most of the material in Scotland was landfilled. And we now have anaerobic digestion plants. We have sophisticated plastic separation and recovery plants. We have energy from waste facilities. We have wood treatment plants and biomass plants. But these sites are often hard to put in place, hard to get through planning, and hard to be built at the right scale in the right place. And planning doesn't help you with that. You'll be surprised to know, because I'm such a happy-looking individual, and if there are any planners in the room, I apologize now. But I trained to be a planner, and I decided that I couldn't spend the rest of my life saying no to people. So I decided that I would go into a more interesting industry, the resource and waste management industry. And what you find is that people don't even want recycling centers next to them. So you try building an energy from waste plant next to someone, and then you find out you get death threats in the post. So we need to think more sophisticated about how we deal with the waste that we produce. And that doesn't start with me, and it doesn't start with you. It starts with the people that design those products to begin with and design them to be fit for purpose. And Frank has been talking to you about how you design something into the fabric of the building, and you may have that then in a place where it can be maintained over the lifetime of the building, as opposed to put in for a period of time, taken away and disposed of when the next good thing comes out. And Wendy knows, and Ruth knows, that there's a lot going on in Scotland to do with resources and waste. There's a lot going on at a UK level, but there's a huge amount going on in terms of resources and waste in Scotland. So EPR, extended producer responsibility. I spent 22 years in extended producer responsibility, dealing with packaging, and then we dealt with waste electricals and electronics, and then we dealt with batteries. There's an end-of-life vehicles producer responsibility, and this is where producers are being asked to take the responsibility for part of the cost or all of the cost of those items at end of life. And what they try to do is measure what they put into the economy, measure what those materials are, and then they're charged for that. So brand names and producers will slowly start coming through the supply chain to say, if we're paying for this, how can we capture those materials again to put them back into our products? And I think that gives your sector some challenges as well, because sometimes for procurement people say, if that's got recycled content in it, is it as clean as virgin polymer? Is it going to cause infection? Is it going to be as good? Because, you know, recycled toilet paper, I think about that a lot. Is it made from recycled toilet paper? Is it made from recycled paper? We go through all of those loops, but actually we can make some fantastic products with recycled content. And we now have a plastic tax. I don't know if many of you knew that, but in packaging, we now have to have a 30% recycled content in packaging, or you'll pay £200 a tonne tax, which Rishi hasn't told many of you about, but believe me, when you buy your groceries, you're helping pay part of that £200 a tonne tax. DRS is deposit return system. So this is where, in Scotland in the future, when you go to buy a soft drink, or you go to have a beer or a glass of wine, you'll pay 20, 25 pence for that item, and you'll get that money back when you take it to the right place. And if you don't, then you'll lose your money. So that's an economic incentive to push people. And what I've noticed using some of your facilities throughout Scotland over the last number of months is that the front of hospitals look a little bit like a shopping centre. You've normally got a Menzies or a WH Smith or a Costa, and all of these premises produce single-use items of packaging. Bottles, cups, stirrers, straws, and there's legislation coming for all of these things to either ban them, or remove them from view, or restrict access to them, or to be included in some other system. So waste and resource management is becoming more integrated, more complicated, and across your estate, it will be harder to manage these materials, knowing legally what's the right thing to do or not the right thing to do, or whose responsibility is it, or is this someone I should work with? And then there's end of waste. So there's a really interesting piece of legislation at the moment, which is about wee pops, which sounds like a new children's TV program we've been missing out on. But in order to stop this screen bursting into flames, we put in a fantastic chemical that stops this burning. But it's actually carcinogenic. It doesn't release into the room while the TV is on. But if I shred this to dispose of it, then we'll find a persistent organic pollutant, a POP, in this. And the legislation says if I collect this for recycling, even if it's working, then I have to destroy it and put it beyond human use and put it beyond coming back into the environment again. And it surprises me because if it is working, I could use it for a lot longer and nothing would happen. So we've been discussing with SEPA, the regulator, and with the Scottish Government about how we can use the legislation in a more sensible way to extend the life of this product, instead of destroying it. But we put that into a product years ago thinking it was a very sensible thing to do, and it was a very sensible thing to do, but now we have to deal with it at end of life. So what we're looking at is how we map and determine what the waste is and what the impact will be at end of life. And we need to work out how we work with other sectors to decarbonize. So you can see what I've done here. This is a famous Van Gogh picture. Do you know where that is? That's the hospital in Arles. Do you see what I did there? And if you want to see a wonderful exhibition, there's one on Lothian Road at the moment where you can go and see this in 3D immersive color. But his quote really struck me, which is, if you're going to be the master of one thing and understand that one thing well, then one has to at the same time get insights and understanding of many things. So what I found was, in order to understand the wastes that come from NHS Scotland, I need to speak to NHS Scotland, I need to visit their sites, I need to look at the materials that arise and understand why they arise. And by doing that, I can empathize with you, I can help collaborate with you, and I can help provide appropriate services to you. And we have got a sector plan, and we are helping contribute to the zero economy because we think we have entrepreneurial people and culture. We think we can open up new market opportunities, and we've got a culture of delivery. And in order to find out a bit more for this sector plan, we interviewed 24 sectors: food and drink sector, we interviewed the manufacturing sector, we interviewed the renewables sector, we interviewed the creative sector, we interviewed digital sector, and Wendy and Ruth were also treated to an interview on the NHS Scotland, which I think they've recovered from, but we'll see. And it's worth reminding you again that you've signed up to a commitment to net zero, and that you're going to deliver that as part of your draft climate emergency and sustainable strategy, because there's one thing which is for real, which is the climate crisis is real. And there's a public consultation that was held on that document, and the strategy highlighted what the NHS needs to embrace in terms of the circular economy in order to deliver through its purchasing power and through working and encouraging suppliers how we reduce your greenhouse gases to zero. So what we found as well was we had to work together as essential workers to deal with the bulking, treating and disposing of COVID waste and PPE, along with all of your other waste that were produced on a day-to-day basis. We learned that we needed a nationwide service for collecting materials from all of those different parts of your estate, and we needed to do that safely and effectively. How many people can you have in a cab? How many people can enter a premises? Where do you do that? How long can the material sit for? We assisted through lockdowns, and we also worked together to adapt to this new world of post-COVID NHS world. And here are some of the things that you need to think about and you've committed to, which is a different way of providing supplier information and buying things, and embedding that idea of circular economy. So can one waste go all the way through and back into another product, or can you not produce the waste in the first instance? We need to tackle food waste, and the reason that we put food waste on here is I am absolutely convinced if you took a carbon measure of what impacts materials have, food waste will be one of the biggest emitters. And there is legislation in Scotland for collecting food waste, but it's not Scotland-wide. It misses out some of the remote areas. But if I was a betting person, and I am a betting person, I think that in the route map that's coming up, you will find that that will be spread out across the whole of Scotland. And that will give you a problem because you don't want to be moving food waste a long distance, or its carbon footprint gets worse. You'll need to think about all of the other materials, such as the clothing, the uniforms, the transport, the material that you move, and that will require more working together with other sectors. So what do I think the future holds for you in net carbon zero? I think that due to the size you are, due to the importance of your service, due to the complexity of the estate that you have, and how you reflect society at large, you are basically Scotland in microcosm, and therefore all of the challenges you face and all of the opportunities you face will be a great learning for Scotland as a whole. But it's no small challenge. Again, another observation of mine was I decided we would have a long weekend away, and being a typical man, I didn't look at the weather forecast, I didn't look at any other features, I just said, right, we'll go on this weekend. And it was the weekend of Storm Arwen. And what I did see was everyone in an electric car the next day couldn't power their vehicle. They couldn't get away from where they were because they were not decentralized from the grid. And when the grid went down, nobody could move around. So I think we need to think about services that are closer to us at the point of arising. I think we need to decentralize, and I think we need to become resilient to climate change, because that helps everyone in terms of sustaining services through difficult times in terms of emergencies or in terms of severe weather. I think it will mean we need to think differently and work differently. Sometimes big and sometimes the cheapest is not the best option. Sometimes the best option is the thing that suits you best in that geographical area for those materials, for the organizations you work with that deliver sustainability over a longer period of time. And I think that the work of RMAS is reflected in other sectors, because we realize that there are some things that we cannot do without the help of others up the chain, and vice versa. You will look at us and say, well, it's up to industry to provide us with solutions, but we can't provide those solutions without you helping segregate material in a certain way, handle it in a certain way, label it in a certain way, or even when you're buying equipment and materials, saying, how do we dismantle this at the end of life? So we've been putting out wind turbines and we've been putting out solar panels, and I love them. I love to see them, but believe me, carbon fiber is an extremely difficult material to recover, recycle, and put away. So as we design these new clever materials, we need to think about how we can get rid of them. So I also think that suppliers would want you to change a few things and play about with some of the drivers you have. So procurement, I think, needs to change. And it's been really, really great to hear from the Scottish Government saying we need to adjust our procurement. I think collaborative projects, so we need to learn. Not all of us know the answers straight away. We meet plenty of people who appear and say, do you want to buy this black box of magic? You put in NHS waste at this end and unicorns pop out at that end, but we just don't know how the thing works in the middle. I think we need to work together to understand these challenges and the solutions that they're. And a thing close to my heart is data. And you'll be horrified to know that the Scottish Government and SEPA and the UK Government want us all to have a digital waste tracking system. So I can press my phone and I'll be able to see all the waste in Scotland moving around live. And there are people trying to get there, but we'll need to try to get there together to make that happen correctly. But if it does, imagine being able to say, I can see all of the waste, what it is, where it is, and who's handling it. in the lab at hospital just with one press of your phone. It would be fantastic, but we're not quite there yet. And I also think we need to, as I say, build these models of resilience, choice, and reliability into procurement and into the services we deliver. But I think everyone seems fit and up for that challenge and wants to do the best that they possibly can because climate crisis binds us together. And we would be happy to work with anyone in this area to try to do that together, because I think circular thinking, tackling net carbon zero is the only direction that we can go in to deliver a better future. So thanks very much, Wendy, and thanks very much to all of you for having me here today.